Eleanor was 66 years old and had a reputation in her neighborhood that she herself had never sought. It wasn't a reputation for wealth or achievement, or any of the things the world tends to celebrate loudly. It was quieter and rarer than that, the reputation of being the kind of person that after you've spent time with her, you leave feeling different. You can't explain how, you can't point to the exact moment, but something has shifted. The neighborhood had noticed gradually, first the closest neighbors, then acquaintances, then people she barely knew by name, who had heard from someone who had heard from someone else that Eleanor's back garden was a place that did you good. She never quite knew what to make of that, because from where she stood, she wasn't doing anything special. She simply made tea in the late afternoon, brought 2 chairs out onto the small patio behind her house, and let time pass without hurrying it. To Eleanor, that was too ordinary a thing to deserve any particular name. It was just the way she knew how to live. But for the people who arrived carrying something heavy, that simplicity felt at times like something close to relief. Eleanor had been a school counselor for 28 years, not at a large or prestigious school, at a secondary school in a modest part of town where students arrived carrying things that had nothing to do with coursework. She had learned early in those years that people rarely need more words. The world is already full of words. What's missing, most of the time, is someone who knows how to be quiet at the right moment. She had practiced that for decades. She learned it by watching students who said, "I'm fine," with wet eyes, by reading essays about ordinary topics that had an entire sadness leaking out between the lines, by sitting with teenagers who didn't need a lecture. They needed someone to see past the surface of what they were showing. Over time, Eleanor understood that her real work had never been about information. It had been about presence, about making enough space for someone to feel safe enough to hear themselves think. And when she retired 4 years ago, she brought that with her into the garden. The first person to sit down was Daniel. Daniel was 38, worked in logistics, and had just come from a phone call with his brother that had cracked something open between them. One of those arguments that touches old wounds and leaves both people staring at the damage without knowing where to begin. He was walking without direction when he passed the side gate of Eleanor's house. It was open, not wide open, just ajar. He could see her sitting at the garden table with a book. He didn't know why he stopped. Afterwards, he would say it was the gate. Something about a gate that's neither open nor closed, that feels like an invitation without pressure. She looked up when she heard him at the latch. She didn't seem surprised. "Come and sit down," she said, as though she had been expecting someone. He sat. She went back to her book, not rudely, but naturally, in the way of saying, "You don't need to entertain me. You can just be here." Daniel stayed for 40 minutes. He said almost nothing. Neither did she. A few times he opened his mouth as though he might begin. Each time he stopped. Eleanor didn't push. She turned a page occasionally, took a sip of tea, remained quietly nearby. That absence of pressure slowly dismantled the urgency he had felt to explain himself. When he left, the argument with his brother was still unresolved. The problem still existed. Nothing had changed on the outside, but something had changed on the inside. There was space where before there had only been pressure, a deeper breath where before there had only been tightness, as though those 40 minutes of quiet had given back something that the agitation had taken, the ability to think clearly, to feel without being overwhelmed by what he was feeling. He called his brother that evening. He couldn't say for certain whether the conversation had gone better because of the garden, but he knew the garden had helped. Claire arrived a few weeks later. She was 53, had 3 grown children, and a career in hospital administration, and had spent the better part of 30 years being the person who kept things running. At home, at work, among friends. The one everyone called when something needed sorting. The one who didn't lose her head when everything else seemed to be falling apart. She was good at it, genuinely good. But she had reached a point where she no longer knew how not to be that. How to walk into a room without already thinking about what needed doing. How to have a conversation without automatically switching into problem-solving mode. A colleague had mentioned Eleanor. Just go and sit for a bit. You don't have to do anything. Claire had found the idea strange. Not doing anything wasn't a category that existed in her vocabulary, but she went. She sat in the garden. Eleanor was watering something in a pot. "Can I help?" said Claire by reflex. Eleanor looked at her with a slight smile. "No need, I'm almost done." Claire sat with her hands in her lap and didn't know what to do with the silence. Didn't know for the first time in a very long time what was expected of her. And then she realized nothing. Nothing was expected of her here. It was such an unfamiliar thought that she needed a moment just to let it settle. She stayed for an hour and a half. She left without having solved anything, helped anyone, or been useful in any measurable way. And she left lighter than she had felt in years. That evening, when her youngest rang asking where something was that he could perfectly well have found himself, Claire took a breath before answering. For the first time, she didn't rush to fix it. She told him calmly that he'd find it. And when she hung up, she didn't feel guilty. She felt something like quiet amazement, as though she had just discovered she was allowed to exist outside the function of holding everyone else up. Over time, Eleanor came to know the people who arrived. Not all of them. Some came once and didn't return, and that was fine too. But some came back, and with those, something formed gradually that she didn't quite have a name for. It wasn't a group. There was no set day or time. It was more like a quiet current. People who had passed through the garden and left different enough to do something differently out in the world. Daniel had repaired things with his brother. Claire had started saying no to some things and yes to herself. A young woman from the next street had gone back to the university course she'd abandoned 2 years before. There was also Robert, who appeared on Wednesday evenings after visiting his wife in the care home. He rarely spoke about how things were with her. He just sat, set his hat on his knee, looked at the garden, and said Eleanor's tea tasted like somewhere he used to know. She understood that for him, that sentence was already a confession. Eleanor had not advised any of them to do anything. She had simply stayed present while each one found their own way. One afternoon, Claire asked, "Eleanor, how do you do it?" "Do what?" "Be quiet the way you are, without it feeling heavy." Eleanor thought for a moment. "I learned that silence isn't absence," she said finally. "It's a way of saying, I'm here, and whatever you are right now, I'm not going anywhere." Claire was quiet. "Most people are silent while they wait for their turn to speak," Eleanor continued. "I learned to be silent because I believe the person beside me already has inside them what they need. Sometimes they just need space to find it." Claire looked out at the garden. A blackbird was moving through the grass near the fence. The light was going amber at the edges of things. "Aren't you ever afraid of not saying the right thing?" Eleanor smiled. "I used to be, terribly. When I was younger, I thought caring meant always knowing what to say. Then I began to understand that the wrong word often comes from rushing to ease our own discomfort with someone else's pain. Now I'd rather not rush. If a word needs to come, it will. If it doesn't, the silence holds." Claire stored that away like someone pocketing a key they know they'll need. Eleanor is still in the garden. Every afternoon when the sun begins to soften and the light turns that particular gold she has always loved, she carries her book and her tea outside and stays. Sometimes no one comes. Sometimes someone passes and comes through the gate. Sometimes someone hesitates and walks on, and that is fine too. The gate stays ajar. The second chair stays where it is. She doesn't know how many people that garden has held over the years. She has never counted. She never thought it necessary. She only knows that everyone who has sat there has left carrying something different, not because she gave them anything, but because the quiet had opened space for each person to find what was already inside them, waiting to be discovered. That was the real thing about Eleanor's garden. It wasn't her, it was the space she made.
And making space, real space, without judgment, without hurry, without the need to fill every silence with words, is perhaps one of the rarest and most powerful ways of caring for another person. Over time, she had come to understand that the garden gave back to her too. It was the place where she still belonged to the world after retirement. Each person who arrived reminded her that her life still touched other lives, even without the office, the appointments, the files, and the schedules. Because the world pushes hard enough already, people are expected to turn every pain into an explanation, every pause into an apology, every tear into an inconvenience. But in Eleanor's garden, no one needed to apologize for feeling. There, a person could arrive tired and simply be tired for a while. Could arrive confused without pretending to have clarity. Could arrive broken without being treated as a problem to be fixed. And perhaps that was why everyone left feeling better.
Not because Eleanor changed anyone, but because near her, people remembered that there was still a whole part of them intact, even when everything else felt fragmented. She didn't say much, but everyone left better. If this story touched you, perhaps it needs to reach someone you love. Share it with care.